Yeah, and that's kind of what I wanted to ask you about because your individual journey. So you started out working at the Horween Tannery. How long were you there for?
Well, I was there for 14 years,
Wow.
roughly. And I grew up with Nick Horween. We went to middle school together, and we were total dorks together. Like looking back, it's like, oh my god, we're such idiots. Just all the stupid crap we did, which I have a feeling is like not aligned with what most people did. But
Right.
that was the relationship I had with Nick,
Yeah.
and we both went off to college. I moved out to California and he went to Vermont, and then he eventually moved to New York, and I was living in California, and I moved back to Chicago while Nick was still away in New York. And he was Nick Horween's a very accomplished chef. He went to culinary school. He went to like Cordon Bleu in New York City, and ended up working some. He would do like private, like fancy catering for like individuals. So, anyways, he ran a business there, and I was working at his with his dad, and I ended up getting the gig there because I just moved back to Chicago from California, and I super poor, didn't have a job, and I've always been friendly with the Horweens, and Skip actually mentioned to me, he said, Natalie, Skip's daughter, is having a graduation. Why don't you come down and help me cook, and we can hang out? And so I went over there, and we like had a little grill out for Natalie and her friends and on their graduation. And Skip said, we just had a fire recently at the tannery. I'm like, oh my god, that's crazy. He's like, yeah, and the real problem is we're such an old company that all of the formulas are on paper. I'm like, oh man, that could have been pretty bad. So he's like, yeah, we got pretty lucky. Um, we're talking about tanning formulas and finishing formulas. And he says to me, and I've always been pretty nerdy and like into computers and stuff. And he said, I know that you're pretty good with computers. Why don't you come down I think he was envisioning somebody like to type it into Word or something like that. So I said, sure. He's like, why don't you work here for the summer and type in all the formulas and get the hell out? But so I showed up and I started working with the tanner, Chris Kolblinger, entering in all his formulations. And I would put it into an Excel spreadsheet. And I was looking at this thinking, like, why don't we make this variable? Because what was happening was every time Chris Kolblinger would tan a mill of leather, he would have to weigh out the material of hides that he's putting into a drum, and then make fractionally like each ingredient that would go in based on that stock weight. And he would manually calculate those. And I saw him doing that one day. So what do you do? Like, what's going on here? And he's like, well, like it's not always a 2,000 pounds. Sometimes it's 1,500 or 728 or whatever it is. And I said, well, I have all this in Excel, and basically I made them like variable formulas so they could save the tanner time. And I think they saw how I took that, and what ended up happening was that summer job ended up lasting over 14 years. So working there was amazing, and I fell in love with the leather. I think it was the experience of being able to work with somebody like Skip Horween every day, and his passion is also contagious. I think that's probably where I'm getting a lot of it from. And if you ever have a chance to watch a video with Skip in it, he's incredible. He's just amazing stories and such a good storyteller. Although he hates him, he'll never watch himself ever. He hates it. So, anyways, I think a lot of that rubbed off on me. And as I was working there, fell in love with leather. I didn't realize before working there that leather wasn't just like a singular item. Like, to be honest with you, before I worked there, I thought leather was brown, and I thought it was one thing and it was just called leather. But it turns out you can make an infinite amount of leathers with different materials that you can tan into it, and an infinite amount of colors. So that experience was eye opening. And then on top of that, the way that I noticed that the leather aged was like also quite intoxicating for me. And what I ended up doing was I would cut little pieces off the edge of whatever leather I saw at the time, and I would put in my pocket just to see what's it going to do. And didn't realize it at the time, but that I think that was sort of the start of me making wallets and things that you put and that you carry around with you. Um, but really, that's sort of where it started. My business partner Dan, at the same time that I was going through this, like put stuff in my pocket, I was also learning hand sewing and sort of crafting in my living room, and he was doing the same thing, and we didn't know about it. And one day we both sort of mentioned to each other like, hey, you want to see this thing I've been making? And I said, yeah, sure. And he made a purse for his wife. He came in and showed it to me. I was like, man, that's really cool. Let me show you what I did. And I think at that moment we were like, man, maybe we should do a little something on the side. And that's how Ashland Leather started. And that was 10 years ago now, which is also really crazy to think about. So I'd been working the two jobs for 8.5 years. And a couple of years ago, I like was so scared to bring up the thought of parting ways with Horween, and I still love everybody there, and we have like such a great relationship. But I mentioned to Skip, I've been thinking about this for a bit. I don't want to harm the tannery because I was doing stuff for them. So I mentioned this concept for me to take Ashland full time, and he was so supportive. And I gave him a big offered him a huge runway. I said, look, like whatever time you want me, like I'm going to stay here. And he was supportive to the point where like he was helping me leave, because I think he's a fan also. And it's worked out really well for both of us. We buy a lot of leather from them, and I'm able to share that with a ton of people now. Like last year we had over 1 million minutes of watch time on our YouTube channel, and we sold tens of thousands of different products. So it's been really like a wild adventure from, that graduation party to you and I talking today on Zoom during the pandemic, right? It's crazy.
It is crazy. And you know what? You are the one person that I have to say is like the ambassador. I mean, I know you don't work for Horween currently, but you're really in a lot of ways the only ambassador I've ever known from Horween. Like I've been so fascinated by the tannery, and I've tried to look up interviews from like different people at the tannery and try to get like an idea of like what a tour through the tannery would look like and things like that. And there's not much out there, but then you come along and you're like the expert because you worked there. You've got so many insights that like I listen to your videos and you say you feel like your content is starting to get redundant, but I learn something every time you post.
Oh, nice.
Literally, like every single time I get a deeper insight into the mind of like somebody that worked at Horween. It's incredible and it's fascinating, and I nerd out on it for sure. So yeah, I will say that I sort of consider you an ambassador of Horween. Like
thanks.
Truly,
honestly, that is what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to promote them. Okay. Which is interesting because, and Skip will point blank tell you this. He'll say to you, he says, look, like we're not the star here. Skip doesn't see the leather as the star. He wants to promote his brand, the people that are his customers. So he'd much rather you say, oh, hey, I love Alden, or I love, Viberg or Grant Stone or Rancourt or Quaddy, all these different places. He'd much Wolverine and Wilson's their biggest customer. He'd much rather you be interested in them than him. I think he's a little overly modest. And that's because of that mindset that he's had, that he's purposefully avoided. They don't advertise. They don't do any marketing. They've kind of like just played it cool. And I always felt like I said, that experience that I had where I didn't know, I thought leather was one thing. I think that sharing my like realization with people is really important because it like helps people understand like there's a difference and here's what to look for and here's what I see. Let me explain to you what I'm looking at, and then you can start to think of things in a different way and maybe pay attention to things like the break or the feel or the smell or like how's it going to wear in. Like let's research these things a little bit more. And I think a brand like Ashland has found a nice audience with people that turn out to be quite like myself, where we just want to dive deep on a singular fascinating thing. And perhaps sometimes it's more exciting to do the research and the understanding than to actually have the thing, which I don't know what that's about, but I feel that about a lot of things. It's really exciting to like find out information about like a really deep dive into, I don't know, whiskey or whatever. So I think I'm starting to cultivate a little bit of that crew right now, and I love it. And I have to tell you, and other friends, mutual friend David of ours,
Mhm.
he's mentioned the same thing. It's just like the people that are into this happen to be by chance like the nicest people around, just want to help each other, and that's what I love.